The Biophilic Leadership Summit is the only multi-day conference entirely dedicated to biophilic projects, principles, and research, bringing together the top industry leaders in an intimate, natural setting to network, build partnerships, and learn from each other.
This year's summit will explore biophilic placemaking and how we can use biophilic principles to promote health, happiness, and vitality in public spaces.
In addition to fascinating presentations, delicious farm-to-table meals at Serenbe, and cocktails, this year's summit will feature a selection of biophilic experiences like forest bathing, bird watching, and more.
So join us in Serenbe for the 6th Annual Biophilic Leadership Summit from March 24th to March 26th, 2024.
Learn more about the summit and register today at biophilic.summit.com.
That's biophilic.summit.com. We hope to see you there.
Hi, I'm Monica Olson.
And I'm Jennifer Walsh.
And you're listening to the Biophilic Solutions podcast, where every other week we sit down with experts and thought leaders across industries in order to explore the innate connection between humans and nature and why we need nature to thrive.
We truly believe that in order to tackle the global environmental problems we're facing, we as humans must reconnect to the natural world and come to a better understanding of how we fit in and how we are so interconnected. So in every episode, we'll interview new guests that help us uncover and highlight nature-based solutions to get us on a path to greater health, tackling climate change, and ultimately getting outside and connecting with nature.
So let's get to today's episode. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, Monica.
So today's episode is one we're super excited about. I know we say that a lot, but we really enjoyed this topic. We're diving into a topic we've wanted to cover for quite some time, which is silence. When we talk about biophilia and biophilic design, I think most people, myself included, think in terms of the visual, a green wall, a beautiful nature view, maybe walking down a trail, or whatever the case may be. But silence, or the sounds of nature, really have their own merit, and we are so inundated with literal and figurative noises that we felt for a long time that this topic is something we really want to sort of focus on for this podcast.
Absolutely. And it's something that I incorporate into my mindfulness nature walks too. Getting out in nature, taking off the headphones, and just tuning into the quieter, slower, less frenetic sounds of nature.
So today we're talking to Leigh Marz and Justin Zorn, who are the authors of a new book, Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise. This might sound familiar to our listeners because this book was one of our summer reading picks from a few weeks back. So it's doubly exciting to have them on for an interview. We talk about the meanings of true silence, the incredible effects that quiet and silence can have on our health, and our brain health especially, and how we can tune out of the noise of modern life without checking out.
It's such an enlightening and enriching conversation, and Justin and Leigh are so wonderful. I think you will really all enjoy it.
So let's get to our interview with Leigh Marz and Justin Zorn of Golden.
Leigh and Justin, we're so happy to have you with us today.
Thanks for having us.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
And you guys are coming to us from two different places. Justin, you're in Santa Fe, and Leigh, you're in Berkeley, California.
That's right.
So Jen, you're the reason we have these guys with us today.
Yes, correct. I was able to get a copy of the book, Golden, and I devoured it probably like over a weekend. And I have so many highlights and notes. And I think I highlighted almost the entire book because I was so excited to just get my hands on it because I could just understand it and relate so much to it. I know Monica and I have been wanting to talk about this topic for so long. So it was so timely when I received your book. I thought, Monica, we have to talk to the both of them ASAP.
Thank you.
So I'd love to hear both of your backgrounds because you guys were independent. You were introduced by a friend, but tell us a little bit about that and why this book, Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise.
All right, I'll start. We're both working in the belly of the beast in different ways. Leigh was working in crisis work, domestic violence work, also working with chemists and different Fortune 500 retailers and university labs on taking toxic chemicals outside of supply chains. I was working in DC on Capitol Hill, really in the belly of the beast on issues like climate and foreign policy and economic justice. And we both had the same intuition that there was a reason, one of perhaps many, but one really important reason why we weren't making as much progress as we could have on these issues we cared about, why things felt so stuck, why things feel so difficult these days for so many of us. And the intuition was that we need to be able to tune into silence more. There are limits to thinking and talking, and there's real power to intuition. So we both felt this inspiration to write this book. We reconnected. Leigh was giving me some advice, and we ended up doing some writing together. And it led to the article that then became this book and a whole journey. And what would you add, Leigh?
So I would say when we met, we thought, well, let's do a little writing together. That was just something we discovered we shared an interest in. Well, Justin shared a great deal of, he had a lot of experience in it, and I was interested. So we thought, let's see what this is like. We pitched an idea to write about silence to Harvard Business Review, and to our surprise, they said, yes, write about that. So when we did that, we're like, okay. And we were thinking about this very much from the auditory angle, just the fact that the world is getting louder in decibels. And that is true. And we'll talk about that. But in the process of, we launched that article, the response was a strong one. It went viral. And it really caused us to step back to think, well, what is it we're really exploring here? And what is the resonance that we're hitting with this particular audience, especially this business audience? How interesting. So we took that opportunity to start into some interviews. We spoke with neuroscientists and politicians and executives and poets, and a man incarcerated on death row who's become a close friend, a Grammy Award-winning opera singer, a heavy metal frontman, and many, many, many others. And we asked them, what's the deepest silence you've ever known? And it's really the answers to that question that helps shape the book and deepen the exploration of silence to the directions it takes.
Well, and I loved that was one of the first questions at that first chapter. And it made me pause. And I think all of our listeners should take a minute and think about that, because it isn't always silence. And I think that was an interesting thing that you noted, that it could be the moment before you wake up and all the birds are outside chirping, or you are standing in front of a waterfall and the water is cascading. It's not silence, but there is a presence. So talk about that a little bit.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, you got it. That's the essence of it. This question, what's the deepest silence you've ever known? At first, we thought about it in auditory terms. We thought about it as getting beyond the decibels. But as we talked to all of these extraordinarily diverse, extraordinary people, the answers they started giving us weren't auditorily quiet. As you mentioned, often they were deep in nature, but sometimes it was something really high decibel, like running the perfect line through roaring rapids, births and deaths and moments of awe, or even the 4 a.m. mark at an all-night dance party with the subwoofer thumping. These moments when people would get beyond self-referential thought. So as we started following the cookie crumbs after that Harvard Business Review article and interviewing all these people, they changed our perspective on the meaning of silence. Because when we asked this question, what's the deepest silence you've ever known? They showed us that the silence, the noise, I should say, could be auditory in our ears, but it could also be noise that's informational on our screens, or it could be noise that's internal in our own heads. And there is this silence that's the space that's not the absence of sound and stimulus, but it's the absence when there's nothing making claims on our consciousness, when nothing is interfering with our true perception and our true intention. And that's when we can start to encounter silence as this presence, as you mentioned it, Monica.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think that's that noise versus sound. And what do we kind of perceive as noise? But the sound of silence can be so profound because it takes us like almost out of our own bodies and our own brains to just be witness to that space that we're in, like you're talking about. It could be a subwoofer, but it's not. It's just that space of just self-actualization, I guess, of just witnessing the space that we're in. That's so profound that we often overlook in that noisy world that we're in. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, the scientists we spoke with, they referred to an experience they describe as a self-transcendent experience. And it is exactly that, where we're transcending that smaller sense of self perhaps occupied with a lot of worry and chatter and negative self-talk and things like that. And instead we're lifted up, we'll say, and connected to something greater than us. And that might be for many of us, like just feeling that connection to nature. Like, wow, I'm in and of it, and I'm a part of it. I'm a drop in the ocean. I'm tiny, but I'm also part of this ocean. Or feeling connected maybe to another sense of source or intuition or just greater knowing or bearing witness to one's own life. So these experiences, what's shared is that experience of transcending the self and connecting broadly and widely to something else outside of ourselves.
We talk a lot about, Jennifer and I, about awe. And you mentioned that already, but with the neuroscientist or the other people that you interviewed for the book, it seems like that did come up, or this concept of being in a moment outside of yourself. But also, I think in one of the chapters, it sort of talked about awe as potentially, God, was it like octaves of fear, which was sort of an interesting concept. Can you talk a little bit about that? I can't remember who the individual was, but it was really interesting about the different ways that awe might be fearful or anxiety provoking as well as exhilarating or transcendent.
Thank you so much for this question, because this really gets to the heart of the book in some ways. We have the arc of the book, we go through the social and political and economic reasons and ecological reasons why we need to reclaim the power of silence in our world. And then we look at the science, and then we look at the spirituality before going into a range of very specific practical ideas, 33 ways to find silence in our world as individuals and communities and societies. And this part that you just mentioned, Monica, is at the heart of the spirituality. And we have a chapter called Why Silence is Scary. And silence is scary at so many levels. It's funny because it's like silence. What's scary about that at face value? But then there was a study at the University of Virginia recently where a social psychologist put some undergraduate students in a room alone with no cell phones and no distractions and no one to talk to. And they had the option to sit in silence for 15 minutes or shock themselves with a painful electrical shock. And at the beginning of the study, everyone said that they would rather pay money and get to avoid the electric shock. But after 15 minutes in silence, about 65% of the men and 25% of the women had shocked themselves. Which is like such a commentary on like why, I don't fully understand it, but this isn't something that's just peculiar to digital native generations. This is something that Nietzsche wrote about hundreds of years ago as the horror vacui, the horror of the vacuum. So this is a really mundane example, like 15 minutes in silence. But Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher, required his students, his inner circle, to spend 5 years in silence if they wanted to study with him, because of how that would change the architecture of the mind. So what does this have to do with awe? These states of awe are these states of vastness where our old paradigms fall away. And these can be, as we mentioned before, as people described in response to this question, what's the deepest silence you've ever known? People often described these births and deaths and these moments of awe when all the internal chatter has to slip away because it's no use anymore, because we have to be in the present moment. So as we talked with some of the experts on the science of awe, which is really a fairly new area of study, these studies of self-transcendent experiences, there's a whole study of what happens in the brain with respect to the lessening of the intensity of activity in the default mode network of the brain and the parts of the brain that are concerned with self-referential thought. So the person who told us this about those different octaves of fear was Estelle Frankel, who's a friend of Leigh's family and a rabbi and a Kabbalist mystic, and also a musician and psychotherapist. She's like a true Renaissance woman. And she, as a musician and also as a rabbi and psychoanalyst, told us that we think of fear just in one way. Fear is kind of like the trembling, caught up state of being. But she said, to use the musical metaphor, she said, there are different octaves of fear. The lower octave is self-preservation. It's the survival mechanism. But the higher octave is transcendence. And she says it's where you're taking your personal fear, that self-preservation instinct, and then in prayer and meditation and contemplation, you're bringing it to the majesty. It's still a kind of fear. Trembling is the disassembling of the self. And this is what we call like a state of rapturous silence. We write about simple, mundane kinds of silence in the book, but this is like the transcendent kind of silence.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that's such an interesting way of putting that in a way of like steps of like different ways to look at it, and that rapture of silence. Oh my gosh, I think about like every day when we think about our overwhelming sense of what we have to do. And we're so busy in our own brains and listening to all the things and the noise around us. That's hard to find that transcendence if we're not really into that practice. Do you teach people or talk to people about how to do this practice to get to that state?
Well, one thing we like to do is really, first off, normalize that fear, especially today. You know, there's a lot to be said, as Justin pointed out. You know, we've been struggling and wrestling with our fear for silence and the vacuum for a long, long, long time. And then to point to the real benefits that are available, benefits of insight, of tuning into our own intuition, our own desires, our intentions for how we spend this life, what we care about most. There's a lot of rewards on the other side, as well as that legitimate and very common fear of silence. But in teaching to it, that's a great question. And what we were asking actually a professor of biobehavioral health and medicine for a definition for internal silence in particular. We asked him because he does these large-scale stress reduction studies and mindfulness studies. And in exasperation at us asking him this question, he said, quiet is what people think quiet is. Quiet is what people experience as quiet. And so this is important for your listeners and our readers to keep in mind that it is what we experience as quiet that is the quiet we're seeking, right? It is what we experience as quiet. And Justin's quiet, and your quiet, Monica, and your quiet, Jennifer, our quiet may be different, and that's okay. So we also want to point readers and listeners to the fact that they have that wisdom. They can turn back to themselves and tune in, not to what they think quiet should look like. Oh, it should be me meditating on a mountaintop with certain type of discipline or format. That may or may not be your way to quiet, but to really tune in, not to the concept of silence that lives in our mind, but the experience of silence that we have in our bodies and in our emotions and in our relations and in our things we do in the day. It'll tell us, are we quiet or are we wrapped up in the noise?
One of the things in the book, and again, early on, and I think it sets up as a very welcoming book and a welcoming conversation, is that, to your point, there is no right way. It's whatever's going to work for you or whatever your truth is. But I do think, as somebody who's meditated a little bit, but want to do more, I have sort of like kicked myself that I am not doing it right, or I'm not doing enough. And I think the book itself, as well as the 33 ways that are the final chapter to find silence, one was like breath work. It was like 30 seconds, just do 30 seconds. And it made me feel very, like, I don't know the right words, but okay, that, oh, maybe I could do this. And maybe I could find that silence in the everyday, if you will. So I really appreciated that you guys were, again, the book is a really welcoming, non-judgmental, sharing kind of tone. So I loved that.
Oh, thank you for that. It's great to hear.
That is so nice to hear. And we really do want to make things snack-sized and easily digestible. And so people actually do them. One of the real inspirations for writing this book was that we talked to so many people, and we experienced this ourselves, this like guilt around not meditating enough or not meditating in the right way. Or we talk to people who are beating themselves up for not meditating enough. And what's the point of that as a culture? You know, we love mindfulness. Part of this book came about through our experiences with mindfulness, and I taught mindfulness when I worked in Congress. And that was a unique kind of experience. And I'm grateful for the growth of mindfulness that made it possible to bring some contemplative work into a place like Capitol Hill. But at the same time, it's like we've had 40 years of mindfulness in our culture, and the culture is more distracted than ever. So the whole point of this book is like, we want to give people license to forget about questions like, am I doing it right? To forget about buying the right bells and cushions and the right course and the right retreat, and to simply trust that we all have an inherent memory of silence. We all have an inherent draw to silence. And as Leigh was saying, we all in our own way know what silence feels like. So we just wanted to write this book so that people would feel the license to seek silence as it nourishes their nervous systems, your body and mind.
Can I say something to that? Because that's what your book I just love so much. Because so being in New York City and going through the pandemic in New York City, it was this profound silence with this edge of like fear and sadness and overwhelming whatever. But there's also this profound sense of beauty in the silence that I found, because I could hear things that I'd never heard before. So like bees or certain birds. So I was trying to step more into the sounds of silence in this world where it was so, now so quiet. And I was trying to really learn from what I was learning from the steps I was taking every day in this new world of New York City that was so different to what I'd ever been before, and be okay with that learning and not be fearful of it, but just enjoy the beauty of those moments. Because I knew it was going to be a very short period of time that was going to be that quiet, but there was real beauty in that, right? There was like such incredible, profound beauty in the findings of what that silence brought to me, and the comforting sensation of what can I get every day in finding those moments of silence and seeing the birds and hearing the birds and the bees and the gentleness of nature that kind of, rocked me to sleep at night, that I just needed that to really help me get through those moments.
I love that was your experience. And that was the experience of the whales who were actually hearing each other's songs for the first time when the shipping industry shut down. And we were hearing birds in our yard that a lot of us maybe weren't hearing before. So bird identification and apps went, and citizen, science, what do they call that? Citizen scientists, were submitting their, what is this bird? And I'm doing a little recording. So birding went through the roof in terms of an interest. And of course, for others, the soundscape got a lot louder. Our houses doubled as offices, and schoolhouse tripled as schoolhouses for a little while. But the point, I think, is that our sonic landscapes changed, and it gave us an opportunity to really take note of the noise, the sound, the stimulus, and the silence that was there. And so hopefully this is a really ripe time for us to be thinking about this and making some changes, perhaps.
And we come back to how the experience of the pandemic really revealed some of the contours of noise in our world too. Because even as we could hear whale song again, and people literally thought the birds were getting louder as we got quieter, it was like all that was happening. And at the same time, it was like our homes were doubling as offices and tripling as schoolhouses. I have 2-year-old twins and a 5-year-old, and just all of that is an ironic time to write the book, But it's like, it was also the internal noise of the world that increased. We talked about these different levels of noise, the auditory in our ears, the informational on our screens, the internal in our heads. It's like noise isn't just what's measurable, as we were talking about, by a decibel meter. So the pandemic really forced us to see how noise operates in the world, because it got particularly noisy in a lot of our heads. One thing we explore a little bit in the book too is like why we couldn't take the pandemic as an opportunity to quiet down more, really in a deep and sustainable way. And it's like the structure of our society is, all the incentive structures are for more noise, because we often mistake stress for aliveness in the culture. We often mistake a contracted state of maximizing dopamine as progress. And that's reflected in the way we measure the economy, even the way we measure GDP. When we chop down a forest, it's a value, but if we leave it intact, it's not. That's a real phenomenon with how we measure the economy. And you could say the same thing about pristine human attention. If we cut it down and turn it into advertising revenue and eyeballs on a page or on an email screen, then that's value for our economy. But if we're in a state of pristine attention, immersed in nature or immersed in time playing with our kids, that doesn't count as economic value. So this is something really systemic, how we measure progress. What would it mean if we measured progress in the direction of pristine attention and pristine presence?
Yeah. You said something in the book, you guys, speaking of that, you said, there's a quote here about online life is all about interruptions. And this changes how we process information in fundamental ways. So that goes to exactly what you're just saying right there. Really, our bodies are changing because of how we live.
Yeah, we're changing our focus like every 19 seconds or something. And our attention, which we talk about at great detail, like those who are studying cognitive sciences are looking at our attention, and our capacity to process information like that has not increased in hundreds of thousands of years. And yet the demands upon our attention is so much higher, especially that which is coming for us, which if it's a grizzly bear, great. That's attention you need to put your attention on. That's something. But not everything is a grizzly bear, and not everything is a juicy berry that we need to pick, and not everything. But right now it's almost as if. So we're being played what is developed in evolution, those same formats, that same tendency to seek information, to seek new, to respond to things that come at us, now is being exploited in this way. And it's a problem.
Well, one of the things you guys talk about is in that world, like how silence and like brain health kind of work together. That I think that in one of the chapters it talked about that even sitting in silence and then focusing on that auditory, whether that would be bee buzzing or a bird, and now I'm talking about sitting in nature or waterfall, that actually helps your brain. So to talk a little bit about that, that was really interesting to me, that silence can make your brain work better or be healthier.
This is something that's been part of a tradition called Nada Yoga for thousands of years, which is the science, the yoga of simply listening to the sound of silence, or you could also say that the inner sound. And it's interesting because nada, in Portuguese and Spanish and some other Romance languages means nothing. And in Sanskrit, which is the origin of the Indo-European language family, that same word nada means sound, the sound of the fundamental sound of reality. So it's like listening in, and that could be listening into your own buzzing in your own ears, but that simple act of listening to it, and it starts to calm. As it starts to diminish when you hear that ringing in your ears, it's almost like finding resonance with what is. And some researchers at Duke Medical School some years back led a study of the mammalian brain where they found that among different types of stimulus, different types of sound, it was listening to silence that yielded the most activation of the auditory cortex in a way that would regenerate neurons, in a way that would amplify and heal brain cells. So this simple act of listening in silence, and this gets back to what we were talking about before with mindfulness, because again, it's wonderful to practice mindfulness, and there's so many good tools out there, but you don't need any fancy techniques necessarily. If we could just tune in and just listen to the silence, that could be enough. So one of the core messages that we really want to impart with this book is appreciating space, appreciating silence, and all it has to offer for it's our health, how it can reset. A friend told me once that can reset the nervous system.
Oh, that's great.
That's beautiful.
Resetting the nervous system. Mm-hmm.
I love that. Also, I was fascinated in terms of that speaking of like almost like the healing, that I didn't know that Florence Nightingale was the one person, 150 years ago, to kind of advocate for silence as a healing mechanism or a healing tool for those that are ill or in hospital. That was mind-blowing to me. And I love Florence Nightingale, but I just didn't know that part about her story.
Oh, for good reason. Yeah, as we came across this, that's why we decided to title that chapter Florence Nightingale Would Be Pissed, because it's just like over and over again, we're uncovering this, really the damage, the toll we're doing on our bodies with the noise on all these different levels. So we're uncovering that. And then we keep coming back to the benefits of silence. And Florence Nightingale was on to this 150 years ago, even as she was in the midst of the filth and stench and things of just looking at all the health in terms of the literal germs and the concerns there. She was also elevating noise as what she called the cruelest of punishment to the sick or the well. She was deeply concerned, and not just auditory noise. She was pointing towards the noise that comes up in our consciousness and our attention when people are talking just out of range of intelligibility, when we can't hear, like, what's going on with my diagnosis? So she was really dialed in. And yeah, we kind of we're worshipers now of the Florence Nightingale fan club, fan club
I can
members.
understand.
Yeah, she was brilliant. And I think we hit upon this a little bit too, is that there's more and more science kind of backing up the toll again of noise and all these different levels. What's happening with us auditorily, just to our ears, of course, to our nervous systems, informationally, what's happening to our ability to focus and have attention and not feel aggravated, and then what's happening in terms of anxiety and depression with all of this internal chatter, which Ethan Cross from the University of Michigan estimates is something like 320 State of the Union addresses of condensed speech going through our minds every day.
Wow.
We are listening to largely unhelpful internal speech going through our minds every day. So we also feel like this is on the rise, just looking at all kinds of studies that are looking at the levels of anxiety and depression happening in our society these days. So that turn towards the benefits of silence, we're new to this. We're on the skinny branches of science right now, thinking about these things. It used to be that silence was a control variable. It was supposed to be the constant. But in these studies, it kept showing up as a benefit, as a, wait a minute, this is even better for the cardiovascular system, or wait a minute, the neural growth going on in the hippocampus where memory and other things are happening is a sustained neural growth. So that's so exciting. And we're just starting that journey as a society. Yeah. What's led the way is conventional wisdom for some, for as long as, it's been around. And the spiritual traditions, the wisdom traditions, we've long known that silence is healing and offers insight and offers perspective and connects us to something important.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys are, and I can't remember if it was an article I read about the book, but sort of thinking about how silence relates to social justice, because you sort of said the toll of noise is different. And unfortunately, sometimes economics can be that reason, or your location. And that sometimes is a socioeconomic thing. You're closer to a steel mill, you're closer to industry. You don't have the luxury of being in a more wide open space. Talk a little bit about that, because I think the mental health issue and the neuroscience, that the sustained neural growth, that starts to become a social issue of how do we get equality in silence, which is a kind of a wild way to think about silence, but fairness. Do you guys have an opinion on that? That's a big question.
Yeah. And there's a couple different dimensions to this. I mean, one, there's a lot of empirical study in the book about the different levels of auditory noise that different communities face along socioeconomic lines, along racial lines. And it's related very intimately with questions of environmental justice. I mean, we've known for so long that communities of color, lower income communities have had to deal with a disproportionate burden of environmental toxins. And much the same you could say about auditory noise. There's limited research in this area, but in the places where there is, it's clear that there's higher decibel levels in places that are closer to more industrial production centers and airports and other multimodal transportation hubs and all of that. And there's also the level to it of the informational noise. Living in poverty, for example, means more stress. It means being more at the whims of needing to pay attention to more types of information as a matter of survival, for sure. And the flip side of this is action to build a better world. What's the place of silence? The world is on fire these days. What good is silence? What good is silence? And for us, we respect the notion that silence of a certain sort is complicity and complacency and apathy and withdrawal, and even silence is violence. Like, we agree as people who've worked in these struggles, we agree. And yet there's a kind of silence that's actually the antithesis of apathy and withdrawal. It's the silence of clear seeing, the work of being able to discern what's really true and how to be skillful. And what we find is, like, a noisy world is an apathetic and withdrawn world. If it's impossible to put down social media, if it's impossible to stop watching reality TV, like, it's really hard to pay attention to the emotional needs of the people around you. And it's also really tough to pay attention to the social and political and economic and ecological needs of our whole world. So we look to Leigh, you want to say about Gandhi, how he balanced this?
Yeah, we were fascinated as we took this journey. We weren't sure, by the way, when we started this, are we just going to say a thing or two about this is not the type of silence we're talking about. Silence is violence. Silent, that's not the type of silence. We're talking about this other kind. Then we really found that actually there's this deep tradition of silence in the work of justice, that it was important to dive deep into, not just like, that's not the kind of injustices, or that we're not talking about that kind of complacency and complicity. We're looking at actually silence as a tool in justice. And so Gandhi took every Monday in silence, being in complete silence, meaning that he did not speak. But he took meetings. He had people come to his quarters and speak with him about important things. And he listened. And he attended conferences and he listened. And then on Tuesday, he would set back out. And according to his colleagues, he would set out, say whatever he had to say that day after silence without notes, in a rapturous flow of words, with clarity about all that he was working on. And to think that he could take every Monday in silence to discern the signal from the noise in his own efforts to address India's independence tells us, of course, we're not Gandhi, we know that, but that we can take that time. We don't have to kind of fall into the delusion that the only way to break and deal with these injustices is by continually responding and reacting.
That's it, right? The reacting, I think so many people they can't help themselves because I feel like they've been programmed to do that reacting, and we're not in that place of really listening, really hearing the world and the voices around us. So just kind of take it in and just be present in it and not overly just share your immediate thoughts. It's a beautiful space to be in.
And we were coming to our own understanding of this in the work that Justin was describing, that work in climate change, the work in removing toxic chemicals. We were feeling the limits firsthand, the frustration, the exhaustion of continually reacting, responding, and trying to think our way and talk our way and frame and spin and, put our way in the world of words. So silence is where we needed to look. And we had a lot of examples of why you should.
Yeah. Are there cases or are there places what I hear from people, like I always try and talk about how impactful silence is for me. And I'm on the beach a lot in the summer in the Jersey Shore, or I'm in Central Park a lot, and that's where my silence is. That's where I find my recharge. What do you say to people that say it's impossible to find silence, or it's impossible to be silent in a noisy world? What do you say to people that are naysayers, or the ones that could say that they can't find silence, or it's not possible?
It's funny. We actually really honor this view, which might sound a little bit crazy, but we spoke with Tyson Yunkaporta, who's this extraordinary man. He's a Indigenous teacher. He's an Aboriginal Australian carver of traditional tools and a member of a clan in Queensland, and also a cultural critic and scholar who has all sorts of academic credentials and has written an extraordinary book called Sand Talk: How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And when we spoke with Tyson, we asked him about the meaning of silence, and he told us that in his Indigenous language, it doesn't exist because nature abhors a vacuum. And he said, what you're talking about, though, the word isn't really so much silence. It's the ability to perceive a signal. And Tyson told us that in the world right now, he said, it's like impossible to encounter silence, basically. The world is just completely wrapped in noise everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's pollution. Everywhere you go, there's this discordant soundscape. But what we can do is preserve the memory of pristine attention. We can approximate it. Maybe we can't come to a full level of pristine attention that was possible for our ancestors thousands of years ago, but we can recall the memory in our felt sense of ourselves, in our bodies. Remember what this state of, we don't have to call it silence, we could call it pristine attention, we could call it pure potentiality, we could call it pure presence, remembering. What would you add to that, Leigh?
I'm just remembering that moment, which brought me to tears when he named that really what we're here to do is to remember together. So I don't know if that, like that hypothetical person, because there actually haven't been that many, I can't even think of anyone who said, I can't find silence, but they may still collapse the idea of a few things. Silence means meditation. That could be one thing. So then we'll pull that apart, right? Or silence means solitude. And it's like, oh yeah, you don't have, no, it could be shared. That for us is one of our favorite types of silence. Silence is magnified when it's shared for some of us, right? So it may just really be getting really interested in pulling apart what that sense of I can't have it. It does, it's not possible in my world. One of the primary teachers in our book is Jarvis J. Masters. He's our friend, a man who's incarcerated on San Quentin's death row. And here he's in San Quentin, one of the loudest sonic environments. When we're on the phone with him, there is just this cacophony of men hollering all the time. And it's bouncing off of the steel and the cement and the mesh wire. And then there's lo-fi radios and party beats. And just, it's crazy there. It's a soundscape wise. But there's also the reverberations of fear and trauma, concern about appeals and cases and lawyers and paperwork and yada yada, and families coming, not coming, COVID, all these things, of course. So it is one of the loudest, the noisiest environments, to use our full term, there possible. And Jarvis has 23 hours out of a day in his cell. So not a lot of freedom or autonomy about how he navigates that soundscape. And yet he finds pristine quiet in order to write 2 books, which he has in prison, in order to have deep studies of astronomy, and he works out regularly to stay in shape, and he's accomplished Tibetan Buddhist teacher. So he's found his way even there. So it's a bit of a tension, it's like, so we don't want to, again, like Justin was saying, it really is louder than ever. And it's not just you. It really is louder than ever. And the whole system is pressing towards noise and diminishing and devaluing silence. So it's like we're built to be noisy right now. So what is the little bit of power we can exert in our lives, a little bit of control or influence we can have in our lives? And how can we do that with each other? And how can we do that for others, maybe who have less of a voice to do that in the world?
Well, and I think that, quote, ability to receive a signal, I think is such a beautiful way to think about it, where we are holding on so tightly more than ever now with everything that's going on around us, beyond the cacophony of information that's coming at us, but just the state of the world or the state of your family, right? Or however COVID affects you or anything that's happening. And so we're holding on so tightly. And if we are doing that, we aren't finding that moment to hear the signal, to receive the signal, because I truly believe each of us have something to give. And sometimes we talk about it and, like find your superpower, because people are like, well, how can I affect change? This climate crisis, I don't even know what to do. Ukraine, COVID, Roe, EPA, anything. We just feel helpless. And so one of the threads that I liked, and I really loved the 33 ways to find silence in the back, because it's like, find a way for you to receive that signal. Because I think if we can find that, and it's scary to find that, to open yourself up and to let go, because you don't know what you're going to find inside you. Yeah. and that's a little frightening. But I think this book is, for me, at least personally, re-engaging with my that I do know that I need to go deeper to find that time. And I live in this beautiful place with tons of nature, but you're still busy. And I'm using air quotes here. So I want to just say thank you, appreciate you guys for writing this, because I think it's sort of like, you don't know what you need until it's sort of there sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so I'm really appreciating this. I'm really appreciating it in my heart that you shared that, because a lot of times people don't quite know what to make of this book. They're like, was this a self-help book? Is this like a science book, a spiritual book? And it's kind of all those things. It certainly offers some things to help. But at its core, the purpose of the book is exactly what you're talking about. Like, in the face of this moment of humanity where it's like, what do we even do? How do we even begin? Like, that the answer isn't always making a statement and going and doing something or getting into following one course of action as assertively as possible. The answer might be in listening. Not just listening to another person, which is vital, of course, but tuning in and getting as quiet as we possibly can so that we could hear the still small voice.
That's it, right? Our intuition, like you're just saying, we can't listen to our own intuition. Like Monica just said, being that great antenna, right, Justin? Like, we're just this antenna that's so beautiful and so aware. If we just gave ourselves permission to find that silence, to be witness to what we're capable of, to loving ourselves more, to loving our family, to just being really in that space of the moment, which is so hard to sometimes grasp for people.
Well, I would ask you guys if there's anything to add. I could sit and talk to you guys for so much more time. And I would love to have you in person and have dinner. But is there anything that you want as sort of a final parting something to share? I mean, and especially to find you guys, people really need the book. This was one of our summer reading picks, by the way, that we did a whole episode on.
Thank you so much.
And, we were so thrilled. Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think I just want to reiterate that this is all about noticing the noise, the auditory, the informational, internal noise. Just remember, it's not you, it's a lot of things, and there still might be some things we can do. So notice the noise and tune into silence. Tune into silence in these little moments in a day, and that can be in just little hits throughout the day, little moments, and then also to make more rapturous, fall in deep, get maybe out way into the woods for your listeners especially, to really connect to the silence and to appreciate it.
Well, we loved having you guys. Thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute treat, and highly recommend the book.
Are you on social media, by the way? Is there anywhere we can find you on social, or is there a website that we can also promote? What else is there that we can promote?
Our website is Astrea Strategies. That's ASTREA strategies.com. And that's our joint website. You can find us there. And we're not on brand in this on brand way. We're not super social media people, but we are on LinkedIn and somewhere on Twitter, perhaps, Anyway, try to find us. We'd love to connect.
We will definitely share those in the show notes. Absolutely. Because we love LinkedIn. So I thank you really, the both of you, for sharing your wisdom on this, because it really touched me so deeply reading it, sitting on the beach, and made me feel better in understanding that I'm trying to go deeper into this. It makes me feel better seeing your work, that I'm not alone, and that it's really important for our overall healing for ourselves and for others. And the teachings that you are sharing are really so important. So I'm very thankful to have found both of you.
Oh, Thank you. The same.
I learned a lot about this topic from our conversation, from your reflections to us on the book. So it's a real gift. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you guys again.
So Justin had a hard stop time for the interview, which I think is probably a good thing, because once again, I could have gone on for hours with them. I love this conversation so much, Monica.
Same here. They were fascinating. The thing I can't stop thinking about is moving outside of this framework where silence is simply the absence of noise. It really has so much to do with a state of consciousness, or really tuning in and being present.
Absolutely. Or even broadening our definition of noise. I think most people would agree that between the modern pace of life, our gadgets, emails, notifications, and the state of the world, we just feel inundated with literal and figurative noise that never stops. I think it's so important to be able to set some of that aside and be present, take in and embrace the moments where you can just pause and let go, it's really powerful.
Well, and it's positive too, in terms of our brain health and individual health, but there's also social good that comes out of this. Justin and Leigh's backgrounds are in crisis work and politics. So by no means are they saying we should totally check out and ignore the state of the world. Instead, and I really agree, they want to disrupt the ecosystem on social media or in politics, that when something happens, there's this huge reaction, everybody's posting like crazy, and then a few days later, the vast majority of people have moved on. Instead, if we embrace the silence or sort of that presence, see past the noise, we can give ourselves the bandwidth to tackle problems in a more engaged and thoughtful way.
That is so right. You're spot on. It's this idea of pristine attention. How can we shift away from this model where our short-term attention is literally commodified towards a world that values this deep focus and quietness? I don't necessarily have the answer to that question, but I think even posing the question and raising awareness helps us move the needle.
Absolutely. So we highly, highly recommend this book for anyone who's interested in learning more. It is full of so much wisdom and includes a final chapter with a list of tips for finding silence. So everyone will find something that resonates with them.
All right. Talk to you later, Monica. This was a good one.
Bye, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for listening. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we would love for you to follow us on your favorite podcast app, give us a 5-star rating, and please leave us a review.
It really goes such a long way towards helping us reach a wider audience and sharing these amazing interviews and solutions with the world.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for following and reviewing the podcast, and we'll be back with another amazing interview in 2 weeks. You're now a part of the Biophilic movement.